of Tom Horn. Tom, clearly you've thought about this as well. What was it that led to the idea once we were a nation?
Yeah, you know, the honest truth is it's probably one of the timeliest books we've ever published. We've published it in a rush. Partly because of the nature of the political season that we're in right now, where you've got Donald Trump out there with his big red hat saying we can be great again. Mm-hmm. But and his popularity even, I think, reflects the fact that so many people in our country feel like something is amiss and can't quite put their finger on it, right? You know, President Reagan talking about America as a bright beacon, a city on a hill, right? Something to be aspired to, something that everybody else in the world wanted to become, or they wanted to migrate here and be part of this great American dream. It was a place where you could come if you worked hard, you could get ahead, you could do better, right? It was an opportunity for people around the world. At one time, what people call the Great Generation, the people that came from the 20s and the 30s, mm-hmm. They won 2 world wars, then they went on to build the most powerful economic machine and military machine in the history of mankind. How did all of that happen? Today we're living in a generation where it seems like so many people, especially if they're under 30 years of age,
right.
They don't really even know how we became a great nation. They don't know what causes made that happen. They don't know what the values were or the aspirations of the great generation. And so I really felt the timing was now, in this political season, heading towards an election year, where we're hearing statistics that more than 50% of young people, 30 years and younger, prefer socialism mm-hmm. over capitalism. It's an entitlement generation, right? And some of the politicians that are out there really play off that. We're going to promise you free health care, free this, free education, free everything, right? And too many young people don't really even understand what the ramifications behind all that are. What is socialism? What is Marxism? Why was capitalism so successful in the United States? What is democracy? And so I just thought the timing was right to reevaluate and to restate, you know, what were the great values of the generation that made America the most powerful nation on the face of the earth. If we believe that somebody like Donald Trump is keying off of something in our country where people feel like something is missing, what's really behind that? Mm-hmm. And how would you make America great again? Beyond political diatribe, what would you actually do to make that happen again? So I really felt the timing of this was very important.
It's difficult to get back what you've forgotten you once had. And as Santayana once said, and I'm paraphrasing, those who forget the lessons of history are condemned to repeat them. Mm-hmm. We're repeating the lessons of the Roman Empire, in which they voted themselves entitlements to the point that it collapsed under its own weight. Mm-hmm. When you selected the chapters and assigned these out to the various authors, what message did you want to convey when this was all put together?
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting because I'm really speaking from my own life experiences. The best things about me, if there are any good things, right? The best things about me, besides what Jesus did by miracle of rebirth, really came from my grandparents, who were survivors of the Great Depression. They were survivors, you know, of the Dust Bowl. They came out of Oklahoma. My last birthday, my oldest daughter, Althea, she surprised me in that she went and found an old Phoenix Gazette article from 1937 talking about the Dust Bowl people, the new age of pioneers that were trekking out of Oklahoma towards the promised land, California, and it was all a feature about my grandparents. And she went and found that again. It had burned up in my house in 2011, but she found it again. In fact, it's here. It's too small for you to even be able to make out, but I brought it with me so I wouldn't forget to talk about it. But my values came out of that. Being able to sit in my grandparents' home and hear how just through rugged individualism, because this was long before, you know, the welfare age and free food and there was no free nothing. You could starve to death, right? These people were sleeping under a tree, and yet Grandpa went on with his 3rd grade education to succeed, to help found the city of El Mirage, Arizona, to build a business there, to do so well that he was able to take care of other people who didn't have. How did he do that? Well, it was all those values. And here I am as a young man, then later as a young preacher, sitting under a tree by the wood pile in the backyard while Grandpa whittled on a stick, and I'd ask my 90-year-old grandpa things about God, about life, about philosophy. And my worldview was shaped by all of that. Now today, it really hurts me when I see what's happening with our country, when I see how freely a generation would give up what was earned through blood, sweat, war, battlefields, when people knew why they were fighting for something and what they were fighting to preserve. It really concerns me, so I was just really motivated about this. And then, of course, you know, my mother just passed away, and she was the last of the McLaughlin side of my family, that survived the Great Depression. And so this was just really on my heart, so I reached out to a bunch of people and said, let's recapture what were the values when once we were a nation, each chapter in there, when once we were a nation of faith, when once we were a nation of strength, when once we were a nation of capitalism. Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis, by the way, wrote the chapter on strength. Chris Putnam wrote a chapter when once we were a nation of industry, which is a huge part of our American history.
The change seems to have been from a culture in which we understood that we only gained by taking risk, but also being aware that when we risked, there was a chance we would fail without expecting the government to step in and protect us from ourselves. How has that attitude changed over the years, and how much responsibility do we, as Christians in America, bear for creating this bubble wrap generation, this generation that is growing up isolated and protected from the consequences of their actions?
Well, I think we do bear responsibility because it's the way we use our pulpits. It's the message that we talk about. And if people are told by the current Pope, for instance, and by most of the presidential and other politicians that are running for elected office, you know, if you vote for me, you're going to get this free and that free and something else free. Yeah, it kind of always reminds me of Margaret Thatcher and her famous line, socialism is a great ideal until you run out of other people's money to give away. What people don't understand is that socialism is actually a system that could lead to the coming of Antichrist because it makes you a ward of the state. Everybody works for the state. Everybody works for, you know, Big Brother. And you get your little modicum of income and your little tiny house to live in. And if you outwork the guy next to you, it's not going to matter because you all get the same portion. Right. But hey, it's free. All you got to do is work every day for the government, right? Or what capitalism did, and you wrote the chapter on capitalism in this book. What it did was say you could be Tom Horn, his grandfather. You could drop out of school in the 3rd grade, but if you worked really hard and you saved your money and you put money aside, you could grow your estate. You could do better. Someday you could even become the president of the United States of America. That was the American dream, right? And it really did build the greatest, most powerful country on the face of the earth. And everybody around the world was working to get here, migrating here because of that dream. And so we've lost a lot, but can we get it back? That's the message of the book. It's not just to stand up and say, woe is us, we're really in the, you know, in the bathroom now. You know, it's to say we can do it again. If a bunch of agrarians, if a bunch of farmers and a bunch of people that migrated here from Great Britain could come here with strong faith in God and hard work and labor and believe that they could. You know, I love this picture, by the way. You wrote the chapter on industry. Remember that famous old picture with the woman flexing her muscles?
Rosie the Riveter.
Rosie the Riveter. I mean, that came out of the Industrial Revolution. While men and sons were fighting in war, Rosie the Riveter, they opened up the factories and they built the most powerful and most industrial war-building machine in the history of humanity.
It is remarkable, and it does seem to be a fundamental change. And part of it is what we've passed on to our children. Part of it, too, is at the risk of being politically incorrect, the changing composition of the population in the United States. The question then is how do we transmit those values? Before we go to break, though, we do need to make an official welcome to Chris Putnam, the new member of the Skywatch TV team. Of course, Chris Putnam is the author of a book that we have recommended for your reference library many times, The Supernatural Worldview, and of course the co-author sitting here of the new book, The Final Roman Emperor, The Islamic Antichrist, and the Vatican's Last Crusade. But Chris, it was a strange journey getting you here, but we're glad that you're here.
It's my pleasure to be here, and that the journey's over. I don't think I'll be renting a 24-foot truck towing a car anytime soon. It's great to be here, and this was the last chapter I probably worked on at my own home before I came here, and boy, it was right in at the wire, but I got it done. And I learned a lot in writing this, and kind of like Tom, I kind of used my own personal experience as a way to write the chapter, because I was born in 1965, actually on this day. During my lifetime, I've watched this massive shift happen. And, when I was born, most things were made in the United States. Our TV was made in the United States. My bicycle was, probably got it from Sears. It was probably made here. And everything was that way. And that's the way. I had a G.I. Joe, and I use this in the book as an example. My G.I. Joe, his enemy was a German. All right? Yeah. That's the way it was in the 60s. And so I had a German stormtrooper and an American G.I. Joe, and we still had a real conscious memory of World War II.
Well, and as a kid of half German descent, my mother's side emigrated from what is now Russia, but they were Germans, emigrated in the 1890s. But I still caught flack in the 60s and 70s as being a kid with partly German. So,
right. And, I was just shocked at the way this has all been forgotten. And, one of the things I talk about in the book also, Ray Comfort, the evangelist, did a video on abortion called 180. And he started that out by going out and showing, like 20-somethings, a picture of Adolf Hitler. Do you know who this is? They were clueless. And I was shocked by that personally, mainly because of that quote that you started out with, and I cited that in the book as well. Those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. Now, we're talking about perhaps the Antichrist is going to arrive on the scene soon. Theologians and many Bible scholars have for many years kind of used Adolf Hitler as a type of the future Antichrist, right? Now, if they don't even know who he is, how are they going to recognize this guy, right? Troubling.
So as I said at the beginning, I've reached the age in my life where I'm saying things that I heard my dad say, and he definitely would be saying, this is not the country I grew up in. When once we were a nation, 12 chapters, 12 different topics, but also exploring how we might get back what we once had. Of course, whenever you order from Skywatch TV, we like to add more than just the book. We'll tell you how to get a copy of the book, and the program continues as Skywatch TV continues right after this. America isn't the same country that we grew up in, but it's hard to get back what we've forgotten we had. That's why Defender Publishing presents When Once We Were a Nation. 12 chapters, 12 authors, each one remembering when once we were a nation of strength, of rugged individualism, of dreams and opportunity, when once we were a nation of faith. From authors like Tom Horn, Chris Putnam, Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis, Sheila Zielinski, and more. And when you order a copy of the new book, When Once We Were a Nation from Skywatch TV, we'll add these books free. Dancing with the Devil, an honest look at the occult. Culture Clash, Islam's War with America. Conspiracies and the Cross, how to refute the most popular attacks on the gospel. And God Bless America by Todd Starnes of Fox News. A $95 value for only $19.95 plus shipping. When Once We Were a Nation from Defender Publishing, because the first step to getting it back is remembering what we had. Welcome back to Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert. Please log on to the website at skywatchtv.com because we've got some stuff there that is exclusive to viewers at the website, and also the Skywatch TV channels on Roku, YouTube, and now Vimeo as well. Special programs. We introduced you to Chris Putnam in the first segment. He's hosting a new weekly program called The Supernatural Worldview. Again, available only as a web exclusive. Weekly looks at science, into the multiverse with Josh Peck, Sci Friday with my best friend and our science editor, Sharon Gilbert, and web exclusive interviews that we couldn't fit into the network television schedule. You'll find all of those linked at skywatchtv.com. We're discussing the book When Once We Were a Nation, 12 chapters, 12 topics about where America has come from and what we might do to get those things back. And joining us in studio now, two more of the authors of the book, When Once We Were a Nation, Allie Anderson and my best friend, Sharon Gilbert.
Hi, honey. I used to be Chris Putnam, and I turned into me.
And playing the role of Tom Horn now is Allie Anderson. So just like in the soap operas where there's just, anyway. The title of your chapter, Allie, is intriguing because it seems to me that one of the things that we used to get in America was this idea that as a young person, you would learn from your elders. And so the title of your chapter, When Once We Were a Nation of Mentors, how did you approach that topic?
Well, the sad thing is that our youth today are honestly being cheated of the mentorship that they should be given. It has to do with economy. It has to do with both parents working. It has to do with the fact that our current society has a family structure that is more under attack than the history of this country has ever seen. So the divorce rate is high, parents are splitting, you have single parent families, and single parents have a huge lot. It's a huge role to fill for them to try to fill both roles, try to remain nurturing, try to make an income, try to make it to school conferences, and still have money for shoes. And I mean, there's just a lot of challenges on the single parents.
Yes, and it's interesting how these chapters, when you begin to look at the subjects that are covered, how many of them overlap. But, you know, my subject was on capitalism, but it was more on economics in general. And since World War II, many women have entered the workforce, and especially since the 1970s, as the average wage has declined actually for people in even families that are still the nuclear family, where you've got mother, father, and children, both parents have to work in order to earn a living wage. We were blessed after Sharon and I married. Sharon was able to stay home and be the primary caregiver for our daughter. In our parents' generation, my mother was able to stay home until my sister and I were in high school. But you're right, that is something that is being driven by economics, but also by the message we're getting from an increasingly anti-Christian culture.
It's a problem that perpetuates itself. So as children grow up without all the mentorship that they need, they find themselves running amok, maybe being teen parents, or maybe not teen parents, but as they have children, if they are single parents or not, if they were missing that when they were a child, they don't even know, if they're aware that there's a problem, they're not sure what the problem is oftentimes.
They have no
so they're
role
not sure
model.
what correction to even put into place. And a lot of parents will say, I want my kid to have what I never had, but that doesn't mean that they fully understand what they didn't have, because it's a problem that has been escalating. It's just that now it's escalating so quickly that you have a lot of kids out there,
who
even
are
the
having
parents,
kids.
and even the parents of this current generation. A lot of these things started changing between the 50s and the 80s. So a lot of what has happened in between that period of time has affected the parents of this current generation. So this problem has already started to perpetuate.
Well, and it's also
snowballing.
Yeah, and it's also happened with the dissolution of the nuclear or the extended family. Most of my cousins, I grew up in Chicago, but most of my cousins moved to California before I was even born. So I didn't see them very often, didn't have that extended family around to have guidance even from older cousins or uncles that I saw very regularly. Yeah, and as you say, this is a problem that perpetuates, because then as children are coming up without that guidance and those role models, then they don't have anything to pattern their own behavior after.
Yeah, and the family is more fragmented, and that's part of the economic issue as well, because parents are having to relocate to find opportunity for employment, for schooling, to get a better paying job. Yeah, so it isolates the children even more.
And sadly, the only options would appear to be just sacrificing finance in order to spend more time with children.
But if you're a single parent,
how do you do
that's
that?
not an option
It's
a
not
lot
an
of times.
option.
It's just a
Right.
really difficult problem, and it doesn't have an easy solution, unfortunately.
Now, touching on the subject of science, which of course is your background and your education, your chapter, When Once We Were a Nation of Creationists.
Yeah. Well, things have changed a lot in the last couple of hundred years. Beginning in around the early 19th century, science started moving toward what we call evolutionism, the belief that we descend from lower species, which makes no sense if you believe in true science, because that's flies in the face of entropy. But beginning in around 1810 or so, this idea of taxonomy, where you take the individual species and you actually organize them into a long taxonomical chart. So they started looking at this and saying, hey, wait a minute. This is sort of like this, and this is sort of like this. Maybe they actually are all part of the same process. And so the idea of evolution is really a lot older than Charles Darwin. His book was published in 1870, but it goes back to the early 19th century and before. I mean, it's an old idea. It's an old spiritual idea,
Well, when
too.
you go back in history, you see that the ancient Greeks, pre-Christ, were
Yes.
investigating this as a possible
Yes.
explanation for how we came to be where we are.
Exactly. In our country, most of the founders of our country, the one who wrote the original laws and helped to fashion the Constitution, really weren't Christians as you and I would define it. They were deists. And I believe at the time that the people living in the United States, much like most of the people living in the United States today, who call themselves Christians, truly do believe in Jesus Christ as their Savior. The problem is when you have leadership who use similar terms but actually believe a different system. Deism sets itself up to replace the Creator that you and I would call God Almighty with the great architect. Anybody you wanted to call, the divine watchmaker who just sets the world going and in motion, then goes off and creates another world. That idea sets itself up for not only evolution, but self-directed evolution, and then eventually transhumanism.
The transhumanist movement. It also has an impact, I think, on your topic, Allie, regarding the family and the impact on the family. When kids are coming up with the idea that we're just a biological accident of
Yeah.
history, it affects the way they relate to others around them. And there are other ideas that are coming in from science now that are speculative, really science fiction. The idea that there may be parallel universes out there, that we're just living in a holographic projection. Nothing is
Yeah.
real.
Well, there was a time when the idea of having a mentor was important because there were standards, and you needed to learn the standards. But we have moved away from a nation of standards to a nation of do what is right in your own eyes.
Do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. That's a really good point, because standards imply that there is someone to create an objective set of standards.
Yes.
And there is only one objective creator to whom we can turn. And when you take him out of the equation, then anything goes.
Yeah.
So this is more than just a matter of science. The issue of creation, the big question where we came from, really has a whole impact on our entire worldview.
Yes, it's the issue of Genesis. If you do not believe in Genesis, you may as well just throw out the rest of the Bible. Because that is where it all began. And if you don't have that understanding that He created us, we are special, we are unique in this world. And because kids aren't getting mentoring, they're not getting it at home, but they may not be going to church to get it there. Where are they going to get it? I mean, when you wrote your chapter, you're a mom. Where do kids go now?
Well, if they're not guided to go somewhere, then they find it. There's stuff out there. And if they're looking for answers, and
The
kids
internet.
are curious, teenagers are curious.
Yeah.
They're gonna keep looking until they find an answer. And unfortunately, there's somebody out there ready to answer those questions for them.
Yeah.
And if we're not there to answer those questions for them, someone's going to be more than happy to stand up and take that role and fill their head with whatever their agenda is. And that's where the danger really comes in.
Absolutely. That relates to the recent conversation that we had with Opal Singleton of
Singleton, yes.
millionkids.org about the predators who are doing exactly that. They are giving kids what they crave, which is reinforcement. They are grooming them, telling them how special they are. I heard a very wise preacher once who said, as he addressed the men in the congregation, sorry, I get this way whenever I think
know.
about our daughter. He said, men, fathers, make sure you are telling your little girl how special she is and how pretty she is, so that the first person who comes along and tells her that doesn't take her away from you, because there are plenty out there under the influence of the enemy who will be more than happy to do it. And I just thought, boy, that really stuck with me, because you're right. There are kids out there looking for that kind of mentoring that our culture is making very
And
difficult.
some of the most important mentors in a family, I would say, in a given family, is that male image. It doesn't have to be the dad. It can be the grandpa. It can be an uncle. But you need to have some sort of influential male in every household, not just for the girls, not just for the boys, but everyone. I mean, the wife is benefiting. The man benefits. but both all the parents benefit and the grandkids who come along after that. But you know, you're an awesome dad. But sadly, there are an awful lot of parents, an awful lot of families. Kids are growing up with zero male influence, no male mentor, and that's tragic.
Well, and one of the scary things that I found out when I was reading some of these statistics is that more so even than the female role model in the home, the male role model in the home is where the children define the parameters for what they consider acceptable in a future relationship, what they consider normal, and even the kind of behavior that they consider to be loving. And that's where this sense of love comes in, where people can misinterpret the wrong things for love if that parameter isn't set in the right direction when they're very young.
It makes them that more easily groomed.
Yeah, it's not politically correct, but it's true. Without a firm foundation in who created us and what his standards were, and then those standards passed down from generation to generation, that is in large part responsible for where we find the country today. And one of the reasons that Tom Horn basically commissioned the authors behind the book, When Once We Were a Nation, Allie Anderson, Sharon Gilbert, were, well, I would say significant chapters in the book. When Once We Were a Nation of Faith and of Values, we welcome members of the Skywatch TV team, Josh and Christina Peck. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great to
How are
be
you doing?
here.
Doing well. Christina, you've got one that I think is right at the heart of what is wrong with America right now. When once we were a nation of faith,
Yeah.
that's a really big topic and one that you could entire books have been devoted to.
Yes.
So how do you boil that down into a single chapter?
Well, it was really, it was a lot of fun to research. I decided to take just one portion of the fundamentals of our country and what it was founded on, and taking a handful of presidents and laws that were written back then to more recent nowadays regarding faith and things like that. So that's how I broke it down, and I really could have done a whole chapter on a whole book on Abraham Lincoln, because that was really the most fascinating president that I researched.
He lived at a very unique time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So that's what I did. That's how I broke it all down. And
So what were some of the differences that you find then between the age of Lincoln and where we are today? What has changed in America between then and now?
a lot of it is the misconception of the amendments of separating church and state. Because how some people feel that it's, to keep the church out of the government, it was to keep the government out of the church.
Really?
Yes, and that's how it was written. It was, and John Adams said that his quote was that the government corrupts religion, and that's why Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, they agreed upon this one thing, that the government is to stay out of our churches.
There was and that's a really good point, because when the framers of the Constitution were writing it, they were maybe 120 years past the era of the English Civil War.
Yeah.
The age of Oliver Cromwell, and religion played a big part in that. There were, fears that the successor to the throne in England might be a Roman Catholic, and of course that was enough to go to war over in that day. But you're right. When you marry church and religion, and sadly there are some within the Christian church today in America who believe that we need to do that. But when you marry government and religion, then disagreeing with the government becomes heresy,
Right.
and disagreeing with the church becomes treason.
Right. And it just all goes back to why they left England in the first place. Tried to break away from it anyway. In the first place was getting involved with it. That the monarchy owned the churches, and if they disagreed with the monarchy, the state of England, then they were
Again, as the head of the church, you were also committing heresy.
You were.
And that you could be burned at the stake back in the day for that.
Absolutely.
So how have things changed then by kind of reframing the problem as we need to keep church out of government instead of keeping government out of the church? Government is in the church now, as there are certain things that you aren't supposed to say if you're a nonprofit entity. Otherwise, you lose certain benefits. So how has that influenced America as a whole?
A lot, and even going back to the religion in our schools and things like that is a big part of it. I actually went to the actual ACLU site to see what the laws or the rules are regarding it. And a lot of it is, we have been told time and time again, you can't pray in school, you can't carry your Bible down the hallways. None of these are listed in there. I actually I found a couple of the laws or rules regarding religion in schools, and I put them in this chapter, and it doesn't say that at all.
No.
There's nothing saying that we cannot pray as a group audibly or quietly in our lunchrooms or in our classroom situations. We can freely talk about religion in schools with peers. The thing is that they don't want the teachers teaching it, or they don't want us as Christians thrusting it upon somebody who doesn't want to listen to it. I can respect that if I can get the same respect if a atheist or a Muslim wants to push their religion on me. I feel like it should be equal. So
Yeah.
that's a lot of what I see that has changed.
And of course, this all comes down to how does this constitute Congress making a law respecting the establishment of a religion in the first place?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. The definition has become very, very broad, and it has to have an impact on our values, Josh. And that was the chapter that you wrote.
Yeah.
First of all, values is a term that's going to mean different things to different people. So how did you define it, and then what values changed? How have they changed?
Yeah, that was the first thing that I wanted to look at, is how to properly define what our values are as a nation. And actually, back in the 60s or 70s, a sociologist named Robin Williams Jr., not related to the actor, but he actually defined what the 10 core values of America are. So I listed them all out in the book, and talked a little bit about how they were at the time that he wrote that and how much that's changed. For example, in the workplace, it used to be healthy competition. It's a good thing because it helps all of us get ahead. But it was never supposed to be what we see now, busting somebody else down so we can get ahead. What it should be is, oh, I see how well that person is doing. I'm going to use that as motivation so I can get to where he is. That's great. And then, everybody kind of helps each other. That's what healthy competition. But nowadays, that has changed so radically. You're basically allowed to bust people down to get ahead. Just look at anytime we have an election. That's what it's all based on. That was one of the main values that I wanted to address in my chapter. So I did. But also, I think what really started to redefine what we consider American values, or even just human decency, what really defined it was the internet. You just look at some of the YouTube comments. No one is going to say that to somebody to their face, even though that's essentially what they were doing, what they're doing when they leave comments like that, or on Facebook, or sometimes not as much, but maybe an email or something. It seems the more anonymous somebody can be, the more they feel they can get away with, and the more their true self comes out. And it actually reminds me of a quote by Oscar Wilde that says, "If you want the truth from somebody, give them a mask." And that's what the internet has done. It's given people a mask, and they can feel free to let everything that's in their heart come out. And most of the time, it's horrible.
It's vile.
Yeah, and at least with a face-to-face, you have some kind of restraint. You're held accountable. And I think that is a lot of what we lost in our nation is accountability, personal accountability. So I think what it really all comes down to, a lot of times we hear politicians say that they're going to do this or that to fix the country. I think it actually needs to start in the home. I think that's where American values need to be redefined to what they used to be, something more positive, because we need personal accountability. And I think we've lost that. By and large, as a nation. So it starts in the home. It starts as being a father to your kids, a good husband, wives being good wives, but really showing your kids how to be in the world. I think that's a big thing that we've lost.
One of the things that I'm seeing as we discuss the various chapters in the book is how these chapters dovetail, maybe without intending it. Maybe the Spirit was guiding us. I don't know if I don't want to claim that my chapter was Spirit-led, but but I'm seeing that there are areas, considerable areas of overlap between these 12 chapters, and between your two chapters. The note that I made here while you two are talking, accountability. I like that word, but accountability to whom? And it comes back to your chapter. on faith. Accountability to whom? If we're not acting as though that someday we will be accountable to the supreme judge of all, the one who created the universe and spoke it into existence, we're free to do whatever.
Exactly. That's what personal accountability is all about. You know, and it's just simple things like I don't go and troll people on YouTube or whatever because I'm worried about what God would think about that, you know. Now, if I wasn't a Christian or if I was just fully living in the flesh, I might be tempted to do that, and knowing me, I probably would do that. But because of that personal accountability towards my Creator, I know I'm going to have to stand before God someday, so I want to please him as much as I can because, you know, he's my father.
Right.
And I think that's important in how we raise up our kids too, to respect your father, because it's the perfect mirror for how our relationship with God is supposed to be.
That is very well said. Just a couple minutes left. Just curious, because I know I learned a lot in researching the chapter I wrote on capitalism, which sounds kind of like a dry topic, but I thought it was interesting. We'll see if you think so. What was the most interesting thing that you learned in researching your chapter for the book?
Most really getting to research behind the amendments and the laws. And again, Abraham Lincoln. I remember learning about him in school, and one of the more popular presidents that we learn about. But overall, finding out what these laws actually state instead of listening to what we're told as children in the schools. Like, you can't carry that Bible down the hall, but you can. There's nothing really saying that you can't, just people saying no because they're intolerable.
And Josh, how about you in researching values?
For me, and I mean, this is something I knew going into it, but really researching it out made it more real that by and large, as American citizens, we have our own set of personal values, and they're all different. And when we live in a nation that is by and large taken God out of schools and out of the family, that leaves the person to interpret what values are supposed to be important and how they're going to define them. So we're going to have more and more fighting because everybody thinks differently. There's no standard anymore. So I really believe we need to get back to that standard, and it starts in the home.
Josh Peck and Christina Peck, you can see why we appreciate having them around Skywatch TV. Both of you, really interesting discussions. Look forward to reading the chapters, and we hope you will as well. And as always, when you order from Skywatch TV through the Skywatch TV store, we give you more than just the book that we're offering. We'll tell you what we're offering and how you can get a copy of When Once We Were a Nation next. Don't go away. America isn't the same country that we grew up in, but it's hard to get back what we've forgotten we had. That's why Defender Publishing presents When Once We Were a Nation. 12 chapters, 12 authors, each one remembering when once we were a nation of strength, of rugged individualism, of dreams and opportunity. When once we were a nation of faith. From authors like Tom Horn, Chris Putnam, Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis, Sheila Zielinski, and more. And when you order a copy of the new book, When Once We Were a Nation from Skywatch TV, we'll add these books free. Dancing with the Devil, an honest look at the occult. Culture Clash, Islam's War with America. Conspiracies and the Cross, how to refute the most popular attacks on the gospel. And God Bless America by Todd Starnes of Fox News. A $95 value for only $19.95 plus shipping. When Once We Were a Nation from Defender Publishing, because the first step to getting it back is remembering what we had. Welcome back to Skywatch TV, and we thank you for joining us today. We're going to tell you where else you can find secret, well, not secret, but exclusive information, web-exclusive content from Skywatch TV. In fact, should have mentioned during their segment that Josh and Christina Peck host a weekly look at the very fabric of reality itself called Into the Multiverse. And you can find that program along with the other Skywatch TV web-exclusive content at skywatchtv.com. And the Skywatch TV channels on Roku, YouTube, and now Vimeo. And you'll find all of those linked at skywatchtv.com. Joining us now, two more authors for the forthcoming book from Defender Publishing, When Once We Were a Nation. What have we lost, and how do we get it back? Joe Artis and Donna Howell.
Hi.
Last time we talked together, you guys were the co-authors of Dead Pets Don't Lie, a book that we discovered after reading that our dog is eating the worst possible food you can imagine, but it's all he'll eat. We supplement it a lot. But
so the book helped you out?
It has been a great help. Your chapters,
Yes.
Boy, you tackled some topics that are really big. Donna, in your chapter, in looking at America as a nation of visionaries, you draw upon the life of King David. And I'd always kind of viewed David, even in Bible study, as kind of impulsive, action-oriented guy, more so than a visionary. What aspects of his life did you draw out, and how does it relate to where we are as a country?
Well, a lot of people, when they look at the David and Goliath story, they immediately approach it from, wow, check it out, this tiny little guy from a field of sheep defeats this huge giant with nothing but a sling and little more than a loincloth.
Story of the underdog. Americans love a good underdog story.
Mm-hmm. But what a lot of people kind of tend to overlook is not only, the steps that he took to get there, which he would have never got there without those little steps, and I'll address those, but also what he did kind of on a political level. To begin, David was out in the middle of a field of sheep, singing hymns to the Lord on his harp, loving the Lord and communing with the Holy Spirit day in and day out. That's what he did. It wasn't just he was a shepherd and he took after some sheep. But there was when he came against a lion, a bear, and whatever, that may or may not have been as focused upon during that whole narrative, he did so fearlessly, and he was able to just go out there and immediately notice the danger for what it was. He didn't hesitate, and by the time he arrived at the battlefield to take his brother lunch and noticed from across the field this big man named Goliath, to David, little non-visionary at the time, David, he recognized that evil for what it was because of his time spent in a field of sheep, spent in the word of word of God, in the hymns and the praise, and the commune with God, the constant communion between him and the Spirit. So by the time he got there, he recognized the evil for what it was, and he acted upon it. If you want to look at it with a modern analysis, it would be like a 15-year-old kid who played hopscotch in the backyard for his whole life. And when he comes out there, you've got all of our leaders in our nation looking at a battlefield saying, get this skinny kid out of here before he upsets the enemy. He's going to get us all killed. But what ended up happening was when he saw the threat for what it was, I don't know if this would be, something you could physically see or not, but something within him radiated so powerfully. I recognize this Philistine. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine against the power and the throne of God? He is nothing. He is no more than a lion and a bear that I've already killed to protect my sheep. That radiated out of him so powerfully that King Saul, a man who in any other circumstance would say, throw the skinny kid out of here before he gets us all killed. He's look at him, he's standing there mocking this giant.
He's making the giant angry.
Yes, yeah. In this one moment, King Saul sees little David, who's standing there again. He takes him into a tent, puts the full, armor on him, tries to give him a sword, and the Bible says that David looked at it and realized that the armor wasn't proven. It was man's contribution to war. It had nothing to do with what he needed to go out there. He saw the enemy. He saw the threat. He tells King Saul, no, you know what? Pack up all your gear back in the trunk. I don't need man's protection.
Yeah.
I've already done this a couple times. I know what is required of me. And whatever it was, all the missing little elements of facial expressions and stuff like that are not described, something came out of David so that the leader of the nation sent a scrawny little kid out there with no armor and a sling.
David had clearer vision of the problem and the solution than the soldiers of Israel, who were trying to figure out, how do we defeat this giant with our swords, our spears, and there are no physical tactics we can take, and we're too afraid to go out. And the fascinating thing is when you read later in the life of David that he's so impressed, even the enemy, that one of his personal bodyguard was a fellow named Ittai the Gittite from Gath. Somebody from Gath, one of the Philistines, led a contingent from Gath, the hometown of Goliath, as David's personal bodyguard, and even followed David when he had to flee Jerusalem when Absalom, David's son, led a rebellion against him. But that's really interesting because that kind of relates, Joe, to what you were telling me before the broadcast about your chapter and kind of the journey that you've been on in looking at politics
Right.
as a solution to the spiritual problems in America. In a sense, it does tie in with what Donna was talking about with King David. Are we Christians? How are we viewing the problem,
Right.
and how should we be viewing the problem?
Exactly. And you kind of touched on this. You really can't, this is what I've gathered over my lifetime, you really can't effectively attack what is a spiritual problem, a spiritual mood, with simply pulling a political lever. And there's no way I can truncate this in the few minutes that we have. My chapter explains the whole depth of this, but in my past, a few years back in 2009, I had what I describe now as a really dark learning experience, where I was very zealous and I was trying to serve the Lord with all my heart, but I believe, looking back, I got a little off track. And I started to confuse, as I believe many of my Christian friends have done, and I think some maybe out there watching the program now might be asking themselves, how do I effectively change the condition and the mood of the country? How do we get this thing back on track? It's like Tom talked about earlier, and Josh kind of touched on this a little bit, the vitriol, the angry exchanges on things like Facebook. People sense that something is really off target. I think even people that would not identify with a Christian worldview would probably admit, on no matter what side of the aisle you're on politically, everybody feels that something is missing. But here's the opportunity that Christians have, and this is my prevailing message in the book. Back in 2009, I think, looking back, I personally made a mistake, and it's not that God can't use people in politics. I do believe there are good, sincere people of God that are involved in places of power politically. But in terms of my calling, I made the error of beginning to be very involved in movements like the Tea Party. So much so that I over time gradually started even replacing, like my daily devotions, the zealousness to read and absorb the Word and then respond to a real calling. Became more just being frustrated and angry, and I started doing political radio. And some of the things that I did on a technical level were really working. We produced a couple of patriotic political music videos.
Devil Went Down to Washington.
Devil Went Down to Washington. I got hooked up with Lloyd Marcus of the Tea Party Express. Some of the videos that I produced were watched hundreds of thousands of times. I'm trying to rush through this. The chapter really goes into this. So on a technical level, everything seemed to really be working. You know, I'm getting my message out there. There's lots of numbers. If you're looking at social media, there's lots of attention. This is really working. But I was really empty. Something was really, really missing. And again, it's not that God can't use people in politics, but we have to be very careful that we don't blur the lines with replacing the real calling of what I believe is the calling of the church and God's people, and that is to love people and to evangelize them by example and to preach the gospel. You cannot solve what is a spiritual problem by pulling a political lever. Now, I'm not suggesting in any way that I don't believe as an American and as a father that we don't have a duty to pull a voting lever. A couple of times a year, go and vote your conscience and do the responsible thing, because great men and women of valor gave everything to give us the freedoms that we have. And so I'm not suggesting we bury our heads in the sand and we say, well, you know, we have nothing to do with that. You know, God's going to take all of this and I don't have to do any of the thinking. But we have to be very, very careful that we don't replace the responsibility and, get this, the opportunity to present to a world that is looking for the answer. Look at what's going on politically. Look at the mood of the nation right now. People are looking for a champion to give their voice meaning. They are right now, they're searching. But they've misplaced it into people. They're thinking that somebody will rise, a champion will come, give their cause, give their cause a voice, and then politically we'll clobber to the other team and we're finally going to get what we want. These are people that are never going to experience the peace, the serenity, the fulfillment, the joy that they're looking for, despite who gets elected. The answer is Christ. That is what my chapter is about.
That is well said. And that's a journey that I've taken in a similar vein, thinking for a while there that my calling was to be one of those political bloggers that has thousands and thousands of viewers and readers but it is very easy to get distracted from the Great Commission. And I think the way Tom Horn puts it, the mission of Skywatch TV, we try not to talk a lot of politics because frankly, why should we step down from a higher calling? And our calling, as you rightly note, is to evangelize, to make disciples of all nations. And it's difficult to do that when you're arguing about politics or when you're trying to do it by electing the right candidate in lieu of sharing the hope that we have in Christ.
And by doing that, Derek, by the way, the reason I describe it as kind of a dark learning lesson is it wasn't that trolls, email trolls, and people being angry at me on social media sites, it's not that I gave that path up because, oh my gosh, people don't like this. I'm accustomed to being a part of ministries that are going to get trolled. It's just a reality of being in, you know this very well, okay? But I did really feel like, and again, this is being truncated very quickly, I did really glean from that chapter. I really felt like the Holy Spirit was showing me that my approach to thump other people over the head with my political worldview was only furthering the wedge between myself and the very people that